Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to co-production between Mormon Mental Health and Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer Parker, and tonight I have the pleasure to interview Ryan Flake, and we are going to be talking about this process of young men in the church who are oftentimes made to believe that they are addicted to some sort of issue with their sexuality, whether it's sexual behavior or viewing pornography or something of the sort, and what that process is like and the types of issues that tend to come up, and ultimately I think the harm that it does for men and women, but mostly men, to have this type of process happening within our church disciplinary and repentance processes. So welcome, Ryan, to the program.
Thank you.
Glad to have you with me tonight. I'm always very thrilled and honored when people are willing to share such personal parts of their lives in order to help others and to share their stories. So I really appreciate your vulnerability and coming on such a topic. So let me give you a chance just to maybe introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your life and what you're up to and who you are.
Okay. 29 years old. I've been married to Lindsay Flake for about 7.5, almost 8 years now. 2 kids, 4 and 2 years old. I work as a cybersecurity analyst for an information security company out east, but I get to work from home, so that's really nice. I'm an avid mountain biker, like to read, play guitar, the normal stuff for a kid who grew up in the 90s.
All right, great. So why don't we dive into a little bit of your Mormon history? Tell us about your upbringing, and I'm guessing you come from a Mormon family and were raised in somewhat of a typical Mormon fashion, but why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, typical Mormon upbringing in the church since, I think, 1840. The Flake side, at least. I'm not sure about the Bay side of my family, my mom's family. But both families crossed the plains and ended up in Utah. My dad's family ended up being commanded to settle northern Arizona. So that's where we get Snowflake, Arizona, which was founded in the 1870s. And my family kind of stayed put ever since then. I was born in Virginia, but most of my brothers were born here, and they're all 7th generation Arizonans. I kind of skipped that, but I still consider myself to be an Arizonan, and I've lived most of my life here. Let's see, church-wise, served a mission at 19. I went to Mendoza, Argentina, had a very enjoyable mission. Came home, went to BYU, studied geospatial intelligence and Spanish literature. And then after school happened in about 2012, we moved out to Virginia and started a job out there for a telecommunications company doing information security. And that's kind of where my other story starts.
Let's get started then on just your sexual development. When do you start understanding that you're starting to have sexual feelings and ideas, and how does that correlate then with the sexual education you're getting from church and family and some of the messages you're getting through Young Men's, etc.?
Okay, well, I think that developmentally, I can be classed with most folks around 12 or 13. I started feeling some urges that I couldn't quite explain. I remember in 5th grade, there was somebody in our ward who had had premarital sex, and his girlfriend was pregnant. And I mean, this guy went on to play for the NFL and had a very successful life. But for a while there, in the Mormon community, was kind of a pariah. I remember asking my parents what he did and why nobody wanted to talk about it and why he was in trouble. And after football practice one day, my dad took me out and walked me around the gated community where we lived. And he told me essentially two things: don't look at pornography, and save it till marriage. And that's about all I had. And one time, my mom gave me a book when I was like 15 or 16, after I'd been caught looking at pornography. I think when I was 14. But that book didn't really help all that much. It was just kind of put out by the church or Deseret Book as a faithful way of looking at pornography addiction, or whatever they would class it at that time. And it was pretty light on actual sexual education. So the first time I remember looking at pornography, it was on the National Boy Scout Jamboree in 2001. Other scouts were there. We were in a hotel in Crystal City, Virginia. And it was one of those situations where everybody else is awake, but the TV is kind of on and nobody's getting up to change the channel. So it was actually kind of funny, in a really sad way, that there's about 5 or 6 little good Mormon boys and nobody would change the channel from HBO at 2:00 in the morning.
How old are you all at this point?
Let's see. That was July of 2001, so I was 13, turning 14.
Okay.
And nobody ratted or told on anyone else there, but I remember that day as kind of the first time I'd ever seen it. And then moving forward in like junior high and high school, I would look at it about once a month. Even at that age, in those terms, I would never classify it as anything close to addiction, and still, I don't think that word is appropriate. But yeah, it was something that I kind of did here and there. I got caught a couple times, but other than that, it wasn't really a big deal until I got back from my mission, and then it started becoming more of a mental health issue for me.
Okay. So, and just give us a sense of back in that time frame. Most of us didn't have smartphones and things like that. So how would you have access to pornography, and then tell us a little bit about these instances where you're caught, which I'm guessing is by your parents.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this was the heyday of file sharing. Programs like Napster and BearShare, Kazaa, around the turn of the century, right until like 2003, 2004. These were used a lot. So I would use these, put in a couple choice words, and soon there were videos upon videos or audio files or whatever I wanted, and so I would download them there. And my dad caught me once and gave me a story about him knowing the IP addresses. I'm not sure he knew what he was saying there. I think he knew it was a pretty empty threat, but at the time I didn't know anything about information security, so I took it as gospel. And I got grounded a couple times, but interestingly enough, my dad never sent me to the bishop, and I see that as a good thing. And I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I was caught 2 or 3 times, I guess 14, 15, 16. And then I gave it up to go on my mission about a year and a half before. I promised myself I'd stop. I went to the bishop and confessed, and it was something that I was so terrified to do that I didn't. And things were okay for a while. I didn't feel the need to use it, and life kind of just went on for junior and senior year of high school.
And if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
how does this correlate with your masturbation practice? So was masturbation and pornography always kind of tied together, or? And
Interestingly
you can say
enough,
none
no.
of your business, Natasha.
No, that's fine. Interestingly enough, no. For the first about 2 or 3 years, I didn't masturbate at all. I didn't realize the mechanics of it. I didn't realize that was an option until I had a bishop's interview when I was about 15 or 16. I think it was 15. I was about to turn 16. And my bishop asked me if I had any problems with masturbation. And I asked him, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, it's when you pleasure yourself." I'm just thinking, "Oh, so that's all the jokes that my friends are telling." And it finally started to click a little bit. And so I actually tried it after that, which is terrible and funny at the same time. So yeah, my bishop taught me what masturbation was.
Mm.
And so about at age 15, almost 16, it was part and parcel together. But before that, it wasn't.
Okay, which is fairly atypical, really,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Most young boys and even young girls are touching themselves, even from as early of an age as 2, 3, 4 years old,
Mhm.
depending on the kiddo, and then of course how that relates to sexual masturbation as far as how we see that as adults. That depends developmentally for each person, but for you, it just didn't seem to be part of what you had explored yet
Right.
at that age. Okay, and so how did they respond to your confession at that time? How did your bishop in particular respond to this idea that you had been looking at pornography and things of that nature?
I actually, at the time that he told me about masturbation, I wasn't regularly looking at pornography, and so it wasn't something that I felt I needed to confess about. I'd stopped, I think, about for a couple months before that, knowing that I was going to move into the priest quorum and have new responsibilities. I really tried to follow as many commandments as I could, and some came more easily to me than others. But yeah, no, I didn't tell that bishop anything about my issues before, mostly because it wasn't a big deal in my family to go to the bishop about things like that. It was kind of just handled in the family.
Okay, like when you had been caught and your dad just
Uh-huh.
kind of gave you
Yeah,
some
gave me
information or little
a couple
lectures.
lectures and grounded me for a little while and sat with me trying to figure out why I was doing it a little bit. I really give him credit for trying to get to the root of it more than just sending me off to the bishop. So
Okay. And you were definitely, obviously, then thinking about your progression in the church and your worthiness status as you were going along, because this
uh-huh.
was, I guess, an impetus for you to stop that behavior. It's like, well, I better stop this if I want to go on a mission or if I want to have this calling or things of that nature.
Right.
Okay. All right. So then it sounds like you go off on your mission. Sounds like
Hmm.
maybe there's not many issues in regards to this on your mission, or maybe there are.
Yeah, I remember one experience in the MTC. About 3 or 4 hours after my companion and I stepped into the MTC, we were called as zone leaders, which was pretty atypical. I guess there were some visa issues for some Mexico-bound elders, and they had overstayed in the MTC a little bit, and so the need for leadership within the missionaries was a little bit skewed. So, I think they looked and found the two most willing to go out of their way to prove their worth and their righteousness. I think they pegged us really fast, and within 2 or 3 hours, 3 4 hours, we were zone leaders, and so that was a massive power trip. And I was thinking then, oh, I really need to be even more valiant, even more faithful, and I only slipped up once in the MTC. Mostly, I felt so bad because they were actually going around different MTC branches or districts, essentially, and like telling us explicitly in our classrooms, "Hey, you can't just pray away a masturbation sin. You have to tell us." And so I went in and confessed, and then after that,
They were specifically calling that behavior out, is what you're saying.
yes, absolutely.
And what year would have this been?
I was in the MTC beginning January 31st, 2007, and I left the MTC April 3rd, 2007. So yeah, they were going around and trying to find the masturbators.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm. So I felt bad and felt like I needed to give an example because it was kind of obvious. They would stay after a certain class or something, and whichever missionary, I mean, because you're in pairs all the time, you can't really get away from people knowing that you're confessing something other than having a companion that wants to take all your secrets to the grave. But people talk, so it's common knowledge, I guess, who went and talked and whatnot. So I thought that was interesting. And it's just a little thing about the MTC you can't really get around because you're together all the time.
And who is they that you're saying they are coming around?
It was the branch presidency.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So grown men that are not other missionaries that are
correct.
calling
Yeah.
you to repentance, right?
No,
okay.
No.
All right. So then you go ahead and confess this in the MTC this one time that you had masturbated. And you felt like your partner now knew something about you.
Yeah, I kind of felt that was known about me a little bit, but at the same time, I kind of chalked me going in there and confessing as well. Look how willing I am to to be righteous and to do things right and to follow the program. That I actually, I had a little chip on my shoulder because I went and did that. Of course, I never said anything to anyone like, "Hey, you should really go in there and confess to masturbation." But yeah, it was something that I prided myself on because I went out of my way to, I guess, do that.
And you're assuming everybody knew that you were confessing to masturbation because you were confessing right after they had told everybody.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so then how does that play into setting up the rest of the story for you?
So I didn't do it at all for 4 months. And 4 or 5 months. And then I had a really, really bad day in October of 2007. And I masturbated without the use of pornography. I didn't have access to even papers or TV or anything. And I felt so incredibly bad about it that I immediately called the mission president and disrupted his dinner and talked to him. And I really loved that man. And he kind of talked me down a little bit and said, "Hey, it's all right," and kind of sent me on my way a little bit. And for the next year or so, it was very, very sporadic. I'd say once every 6 weeks, 2 months, and I didn't really feel all that bad about it until I was called as a zone leader. And once I was called as a zone leader, I had a general authority come and speak to missionaries and give us some training and whatnot, and I started feeling like my lack of success in the mission was attributed to masturbating. So I kind of went in a depressive spiral. I ended up seeing the mission psychologist about it. And then there were rumors that I was going home and that I was depressed. And, I was depressed. I wasn't going home, but it actually, I think, led to me being taken away from that responsibility and then sent for the last bit of my mission to kind of be mission police or to keep people who wanted to leave the mission. I kept them in the mission by just being nice to them and trying to be the best missionary I could. But those last 6 months, kind of a depressive time, and I was calling the mission president a lot, and he was having me recite scriptures 100 times a day, and that didn't really help me. And so those last 6 months were kind of tough.
And all due to this kind of correlation that you were thinking about this guilt.
Yeah.
All due to this piece that you had not been able to be 100% faithful in this regard.
Right. I was 100% faithful in every other commandment or rule or principle that I could find, even to the point of scrupulosity. I remember getting up one time on a chair in a crowded slum and preaching Dan Jones style out of the Book of Mormon, just kind of at the top of my lungs, just hoping I was brave enough or valiant enough for that message to carry. But my companion ended up telling on me, and I had to go back to the mission psychologist. So that was kind of depressing there.
Meaning because you were preaching in a way that wasn't seen as appropriate?
Yeah. I mean, I would stop semi trucks going down highways,
Mm,
and give the bewildered drivers a copy of the Book of Mormon.
mm-hmm,
I saw these things as marks of valiancy and whatnot, but what I
mm-hmm.
couldn't see is that, yeah, I was not in my right mind.
Hmm. And prior to your mission, as far as actual sexual behavior, there had been no girlfriends or
No,
things of
absolutely
that
zero.
nature. So you were a virgin, you were fairly innocent and naive as far as a sexual young teen goes, it sounds like,
Mhm.
and yet experiencing very intense sexual shame for something
Right.
that is really considered normative developmental behavior in the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And had you had any issues with anxiety or those types of things prior to your mission in other areas of your life?
I was never diagnosed with anxiety, but at age 14, I was diagnosed with prehypertension. So my blood pressure has always been really, really high. And I would say unacademically that I'm an anxious person, but I've never been diagnosed.
Okay. So you've got two things kind of feeding this. You've got the messages coming from the church. You've got maybe a propensity towards an anxious type of vulnerability
Hmm.
and these expectations for, I guess, 100% compliance with some type of sexual expectation all going on at the same time.
Right.
Okay. And this really affects the quality of your mission, especially towards the end, to the point that you're feeling some depression symptoms and not necessarily acting in ways that you feel were normative at the time.
Right.
So then what happens?
Hmm. So I get back from my mission in February of 2009, and I immediately, well, go back a little bit. In my last interview with my mission president, we set goals, and one of my goals was to go on a date within 3 weeks of being back from my mission. And so I went on a trip with a friend about 2 weeks after I got home, and there was somebody I'd already known there from high school, which turned out to be Lindsay, my now wife. So we met and we talked, and we started dating. And while we were dating, about 5 or 6 months in, right before I proposed, I told her that I had had issues with pornography in the past. Uh, I was the type of person that thought that radical self honesty in a relationship like that was necessary. Not sure about that now, but that's what I did. So I told her that, and I assumed that that kind of primed her a little bit if there was to be a relapse or anything like that. And she thought that that was okay, that was in my past, and that didn't bother her all that much. And so we were engaged, and we got married at the end of 2009.
And this goal to come home and start dating right away, was that something suggested by the mission president, or was that your idea because you were worried about your sexual proclivities, or where did that come from?
Uh, it was a little of both. Um, in one of my interviews before I left, I remember looking at my mission president square in the face and saying, "I don't think I can ever love a woman the right way again." And he just looked at me and didn't say anything. I don't know if he knew what to say, but that's kind of how that meeting ended. And so I got it into my head that I needed to be married as soon as possible.
So that
And
you wouldn't be able to love a woman because you had seen pornographic images?
yes, yeah, that's what I would say to myself, and that's what I said to a couple priesthood leaders, and they didn't refute that.
Nobody thought maybe that'd be
No,
a challengeable
no,
perception?
nope. I said the same thing to, well, I was called as an elders quorum president right when I got back to BYU in the spring of 2009. And again, radically self honest, I confessed to it was the stake president, And he looked at me and said, "Okay, don't do it again. And if you do it again, we'll have to they were having an issue finding people that weren't quote unquote addicted to pornography to be the elders quorum president. So apparently, I who didn't look at porn but was still masturbating was the lesser of evils for them. so anyway, it's kind of beside the point. But I remember saying the same thing to him about loving a woman, and he didn't say anything. He didn't refute that at all. So I carried that idea with me up until we got married in December 2009.
Yeah, so you really had this affect your self-esteem and your self-identity quite a bit as far as how
Absolutely.
you saw yourself as a potential mate, and really kind of a less than type of approach.
Yeah, and I thought every woman could see it in me, that it was just on my, they could see it in my eyes. And so I wouldn't maintain eye contact all that well. And I had some really big, confidence issues and whatnot. But yeah, it affected me a lot.
Okay, so you go on and get married to your wife, and where do we go from there?
Where do we go from there? So, we got married in December of 2009, and immediately I was a BYU student, so we went back to BYU and of course found an apartment at Y-Mount, just a hop, skip, and a jump from the Provo Temple. And Lindsay at the time was at ASU, but she converted her major to an online major and was able to come up there with me and finish out her schooling online. And yeah, we got up there in the dead of winter and started trying to figure out what it meant not only to be married, but to be married in a cold place. And in a place where it was preferable to stay inside a lot. And we were very much sexually mismatched. Lindsay, if she were here right now to say the same words, I promise she would say the same thing, but she was quite repressed, and she repressed a lot of her sexuality. And we didn't have the vocabulary really to go really talk through that very much. I mean, we're just young kids. I was 22, and she was 20. And so things just didn't work out in that department for a long time. And I know that's common. But yeah, it kept on wearing on me as like, she's not interested in me. All my fears have come true. I've married someone who doesn't want me like that because I looked at pornography growing up sporadically. And I was just continuously blaming myself and putting myself in that guilt shame cycle, trying to pray it away. But the more I tried to pray it away, the worse it got. The more I focused on trying to get rid of it, the worse it got, until I met with a psychologist a psychologist in training at the BYU Health Center or Medical Center. This person was a student, I think, in the last years. So this was mid to late 2010. And this person really helped me see, or tried their best to help me see, that there were some other issues going on, possibly. I shouldn't look at it just as I'm righteous or not righteous. This person helped me see that this could be a natural thing that we humans do that isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I didn't expect to hear that.
From a BYU professional, especially.
Right. I did not expect to hear that. I mean, we did some of the typical things. How's your relationship with your mother? And we went through all that song and dance, and that actually helped. I'm not saying that's a bad practice, but I was expecting to go there and get chewed out, and I had heard some horror stories from other people, but it turned out to be a really good experience, and that kind of helped for about 2 years. That really helped me keep going. Just one or two sentences. Hey, don't be so hard on yourself. I wish you knew how many people around here are dealing with the same things you are. And just knowing that there were other people and that I wasn't alone, that really, really helped.
So you went for a few sessions.
hmm
This person normalized some of what you were experiencing, said, don't be so hard on yourself, gave you maybe some ability to reframe this problem. And then also, just to be clear for the audience, we have your wife's permission for you to be talking about your
Yeah.
story together.
Yes.
And she was invited to come on. She preferred not to, but just so everybody knows that she's fully aware of this conversation and comfortable with us talking about it. So,
Yes, absolutely. And I want to go out of my way right now. I should have done this at the beginning to say that I in no way blame Lindsay for her response to any of my actions or for her idea of herself or for me or for sexuality in general. I don't blame her at all.
well, and I like how you framed it to begin with, that the two of you were really, in a sense, just kids and
hmm
getting together and getting married from a culture that doesn't do the best job necessarily to sexually educate and prepare people for that shift from no to yes within just a matter of minutes. And
Right.
so that's actually a very common Mormon story, right? As far as that
Yeah.
transition from no, no, no to yes, yes, yes. And now I'm going to figure out how to be a sexual being.
Right.
All right. So why isn't that the end of the story? Why didn't you go home and say, great, I've got some good tools now and I don't have
Mm,
to feel so badly about this and
right.
I can move on?
So moving forward about 2 years, to about 2 years from those sessions, which were in August September 2010 timeframe. In those 2 years, things got better a little bit. We've always been very good communicators and just best friends all around. But sex and those needs and desires was just, I was speaking French and she was speaking Japanese. It was just not clicking at all. So during those 2 years, Lindsay had two miscarriages, and I mean they were really early. Not that that's a consolation, but it is at the same time, and so that affected her quite a bit because a lot of her worth was tied into having children, and in her own words, she didn't want to be an old mom. So she wanted to have kids as soon as possible so she could be out there running and playing with them as long as they wanted to and
Mm.
wouldn't be limited by her age. So in those 2 years, she had two miscarriages, and those brought us closer together in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up graduating at the same time in spring of 2012, and when we graduated, Lindsay was 4 or 5 months pregnant with our oldest. So that pregnancy was successful, and I had received a job offer to go out to Virginia, and I talked it over with Lindsay, and she said, "Okay, let's do it." My major was geospatial intelligence, and so the thought was that I would work for FBI, CIA, NSA, hunting terrorists, or making maps, or one of a number of different things. And so it was kind of always in the program that we would stray. A lot of it's a joke at BYU that a lot of the girls from Mesa like to come back here once they're married, and it's absolutely true. There's so many of us that went out, did our thing, got married, and then came back. Um, but she knew that might not be our story. So we end up in Virginia, and things are going pretty well for about 2 or 3 months, and then in July I break my collarbone commuting back from work. I would ride my bike 25 miles into Washington, D.C. and 25 miles out because it was faster than getting on the freeway and sitting in traffic for 3 hours.
Oh,
So
wow.
I do my workout time because either way I would have about 3 hours a day of commuting. So I broke my collarbone on my way home from work one time. It was pretty stupid. I kicked a basketball away from a river that this guy was shooting hoops by a river, and I was still clipped in on my right side, and so I did a front flip on a road bike and ended up breaking my collarbone.
Mm.
That really lowered my spirits, and I was on the couch for 3 weeks and couldn't really move. I was really depressed. Things at work were really volatile. my boss had just gotten fired and I was the only one left in the department. And I had been out of college for about 3 months, so I had absolutely zero skills. So I was kind of terrified. That just kind of led me to self-soothe and go back to old ways to cope. So that was in July. Around late August, early September, Lindsay actually was put on bed rest. And there were some iron issues and some other things that I can't remember right now. And I saw that as a direct response to me looking at porn and masturbating.
Hmm.
So
Like she was being punished for your behavior.
Yes. And then I started having dreams. And I don't dream hardly ever. And I started having dreams that my son, we knew he was male at that point, there was going to be something, quote unquote, wrong with him. That there was going to be some sort of complication. And I was just freaking out and blaming myself for it. And I even told a friend about it. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know. I confided in him that I'd been doing that, and
A
he did
Mormon friend.
a Mormon friend, and he didn't really know what to tell me either. And so I just kind of felt that for a while, and then Aiden was born, and he was born perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. I was super happy about that, over the moon, to the point where I was like, okay, God, this is the sign that I need to confess. So also, some of my friends that already had kids were telling me that they felt this amazing connection to their kids, this amazing love that they've never felt before, and I didn't feel that. I didn't. I thought there was supposed to be some spiritual extra love that you're given just by being a father, and I didn't feel that. And so part of it was paying my dues to God for giving me a healthy son, and the other part was just some fear around that. And so I went into my bishop and said, "Hey, I've been looking at porn once every 2 or 3 weeks and masturbating," and he gets this just kind of, "Oh, not again. I don't want to hear this again" type look. And he only asked me 2 questions. He's like, "Are you masturbating too?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay. Will you give me your temple recommend?" I said, "Yeah, I don't have it on me, but I will." He said, "Okay. I need you to go to the Addiction Recovery Program." And then the meeting was over. So I go home. I tell Lindsay about it. I had told her that I was going in to the bishop to confess, and she seemed to be pretty cool about that. Pretty composed. I felt really bad about dropping that bomb on her with a newborn, but that's just kind of how it shook out. So I think the next week was the first week that I went. So I went to the stake center, and there was a couple that had been leading it for a couple years at that point.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second. So when he referred you to this addictions program, there was really no discussion on the frequency, the type of pornography you were looking at, the amount of masturbation. I mean, you're masturbating, you're coming in with a porn confession, off you go. Is that fair?
Yeah. I got the feeling that he got that a lot, and that was his canned
go-to
response. Yeah.
Okay. And do we want to talk a little bit at this point just to explain? Well, I don't know how much you know about it. I can definitely talk a little bit about what I know about it, but what the 12-step program is like at church and how that was developed and what that's about.
I actually yesterday and today went through my PDF that I've had for a couple of years. I went through all of them and went through quotes and stuff that really bugged me and things that made me sick. But go ahead. You know a lot more about how it was devised and whatnot than I probably do.
Well, I remember when it came out, and I'm not going to say I'm the expert on it by any means, but I do remember some excitement about this idea that we'd be offering kind of an alternative to the 12-step groups that you find, in our regular communities. And my understanding about what drove that type of motivation to even develop that program, as far as having it go through the church was that a lot of people who go to 12-step programs, whether it's for substance abuse or sexuality issues or gambling or whatever topic you feel like you have an issue with, that some of the problems that LDS members were having going to these groups is that typically, not always, but typically the behavior that an LDS member was exhibiting was a lot less than other people who would go to these groups, because again, we're pretty rigid about our expectations for our behavior to be kind of 0%.
Right.
And so, whereas other people in the community really only go to these groups if they're really struggling to the point that these types of behaviors are interfering dramatically with their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of these groups is that you share your stories. You talk about what's going on. You talk about your behavior. You're very frank and open about how life is going. And so a lot of LDS members were either, one, uncomfortable with that type of very frank discussion, and oftentimes with people who are using swear words or, just a different culture. Or two, they felt like they were learning behaviors that they had not heard about before. So now maybe some people reported going and doing more things than they had originally done because they were listening and hearing about things, kind of like when you mention, somebody suggested masturbation and then you're like, oh, well, I might go try that. We learn from each other. That's not atypical. And I think the third thing, especially with the chemical dependence groups, is that it's very common for people who struggle with substances to then move towards a legal substance. So you get, people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous or some of the drug groups, and you have kind of chain smokers, for example, who attend these groups. So again, LDS members might be uncomfortable in those types of settings. So the church came out with this idea that if we can offer the basic group format, which we know is somewhat successful or seems to help people with these types of behavioral changes, and we can offer it in a setting where these issues don't come up, then that would be super great. So as a result of that, these addiction groups, as far as I am aware of them, I've never led one. I've gone to a few just to see what they're like, but nobody shares what the addiction is in most of these groups. So you sit with a group of people, you don't know if you're there for alcohol or for pornography or for food or for whatever. You just don't know why other people are there. And the other big difference that I see is that it's led by usually a couple, and usually an older couple. It's almost like a dual calling, almost like older missionary type process. And those people usually may not have any experience with that, with addiction themselves or with substance dependence or with anything. So they may or may not have any experience. Whereas in community 12-step groups, these groups are usually led by people who feel like they've gone through the program successfully themselves and have dealt with some level of behavioral processes themselves. And there's also a very large emphasis on a mentoring program so that people who have been quote unquote sober take newbies under their wings, and you have somebody who you can call at any time of the night. So those things are all missing from the church system. So is that a fair overview of how the church system works?
As far as I understand it, yes.
Okay. This is where you refer to this 12-step program.
Right.
That is being offered.
One other thing too. There's kind of two different types of these programs. There's every once in a while there'll be one that in the name it's for pornography addiction or sex addiction or however they term it. But yes, the other one is a general addiction recovery, and you don't know who has what, sin or infraction.
So when they have a specific one, you're saying it's specifically for pornography, not for substances, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. I talked to a friend of mine who also went through the program, but his was specifically for pornography addiction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is this the first time that you're being, in a sense, dealt with this identity of being an addict?
Yeah, it is. So
What was that
it
like?
was held. It was held at the stake center, and in the room that typically a high council uses. I think you just call it the high council room. That's what I've always called it my entire life. But the one with the really big table. So there were about 6 or 7 of us that first night, and then the couple that ran it. I remember going in there and just being really, really nervous. We'd been in that stake for less than a year, but I already could recognize 1 or 2 people there, and so I was nervous because we had just moved to a new place, and I didn't want to get off on the wrong foot. And I felt like if people knew my secret, no one would ever befriend me again. That was kind of difficult because, again, like you said, you don't know what their sin or infraction is. So we get in there, we do the introductions, and talk about how our last week was. I remember talking about going on a bike ride because I had had bad thoughts. It was pretty easy to see through people's descriptions of their problems to see what problems they had or what they were sent there for. But after I was done, the next person was talking about how they woke up at somebody's house that they'd never seen before and their wallet was gone. And, they apparently had a problem that made them wake up in somebody else's house. And so that was kind of my first implication that, maybe I didn't have a real problem, but I kind of buried that a little bit. I can't remember exactly which of the steps we were on that week because it's rolling. You can go or you can stop and start whenever. I mean, unless you're commanded to go there. It wasn't the first. I do remember that. But yeah, I just remember sitting there reading a couple scriptures, talking very vaguely about addiction and recovery and humility and pride. And pride is the root of everything in the 90-page addiction recovery manual. They talk about pride a lot, and how just over and over again you cannot get better or change without God's help, and that you must do everything 100% from the time you decide to change onward. I can talk more specifically about step 5 and step 6, which I was there when those were discussed and the homework for that and all that. And that's where I found most of the problems and the things that really affected me. I don't have a problem with a God-focused 12-step program, no matter what religion. I just think that it contributes to the shame cycle to say that unless you do this program, you will never be healed. And it also tends to throw friends and therapists under the bus, saying that even if you've tried therapists in the past or had a therapist, you can't be healed without going through this program. So anyway, there's a 1-minute diatribe that I can get into later on.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too. But through every storm we traveled
on like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary, no, it's extraordinary love.